Hello and welcome to the third episode of the Barleymen. I'm Jason, this is Mike.
Hi.
Alright Mike, what are we going to be talking about today?
Well, for those of you who watched episode 2, you will know that we compared old and new Fat Tire. Today, we're doing something very similar. We're going to compare the old Sam Adams with the new Sam Adams. So there's this trend going on where beers are changing their image, their look, their taste, their style, and we talked a little bit about that in episode 2. Check it out, as to some of the reasons why. So, Jason, why don't you tell us a little bit about the history of Sam Adams?
1984, I believe, Jim Koch actually quit his job and started brewing in his kitchen. Jim Koch is a sixth-generation brewer of German descent. His parents came from Germany. He's originally from Cincinnati, Ohio, but he went to Harvard, fell in love with Massachusetts, I believe, and never left. He got a corporate job, but he didn't stay there long, decided he was more interested in brewing. And the funny thing behind this is actually this recipe for Boston lagers, his great-great-grandfather's. He found it in the attic of his parents' house and decided that he was going to give it a whirl, and that's what we're drinking today.
As he went to go brew Sam Adams, he needed a specific type of hops.
Yes.
And that particular type of hops had been victimized and was going extinct. And he led the effort to restore it.
He did indeed, yeah. Hallowed Mittelfrüh, which is one of the 5 noble hops. Jim Koch being of German descent and trying to really make this a German product, so to speak, made it a big statement that the hops that he used were German hops. He used the Hallertau Mittelfrüh and the Tettnanger. And the Hallertau Mittelfrüh, I didn't even know this. Mike, you educated me about this. They almost went extinct, I guess, back in the 1990s. Was it the 90s?
I think it was a little bit earlier than that, but they did almost go extinct. But he needed them, and so he single-handedly spearheaded the effort to make them. Interesting about both types of hops that are used in this. They both store very poorly. So the industry at large could have cared less about this particular type of hops going extinct. They weren't really using them, which is why they were going extinct. Between the blight and between the industry kind of being like, whatever, they started, it was declining for sure. And then he needed them, and he personally found some people that still grew them, and he cultivated them, and they are back. But they are not a good hops to store long term, for sure. They store very poorly.
Right.
Tell us what it means, Jason, noble hop. You threw the phrase, there's only 5 noble hops. What is a noble hop?
Okay, so noble hops, God, you're going to ask me to name all 5. I don't think I can name all 5.
I don't think you have to name them all, just tell us what the category means.
Basically, they're from Germany and the Czech Republic, which is, I would say, basically where modern beer brewing started. Of course, it spread to England and Belgium. But if you want to go back in history 1,000 years or more, we're talking Germany, we're talking the Czech Republic. And the hops that they use, their local hops, are what are known as the noble hops. They're not super strong in flavor like what you get from the Pacific Northwest. They're more floral, they're more fragrant, they're sometimes more subtle. But for beer geeks, there's a lot of, you want to talk about the coolness factor you always go to. There's a lot of coolness factor when you talk about the noble hops, when you talk about Hallertau Mittelfrüh, the Tettnanger, I'm horribly mispronouncing these, sorry. Saaz is another big one, I believe that one's out of the Czech Republic. But I could totally understand how it could have gone extinct, because especially back in those days, the Pacific Northwest was producing pretty much all the hops, and especially for American beers, that's what they're using. No one's using noble hops. Even now, I mean, if you were to ask me point blank, you're like, who uses Hallertau Mittelfrüh? I'd be like, Sam Adams. That's all I know.
Yeah. And I, real briefly, before we just glance over all that history, I do want to mention, because it speaks to my humanist heart, I do want to mention 2 things. The first is that the use of hops allowed beer to be imported on a much larger geographical scale. And so it really turned beer from what I would call a cottage industry. Up until that point, you would have had brew wives. You would have had ale wives. They would have been the ones brewing the beer. And it was a very localized thing, and there were all kinds of women who used all kinds of semi-preservatives, right? So, pardon me. So hensbane, for example,
Right.
which, if done incorrectly, is poisonous. If done moderately heavy, is hallucinogenic, and if done right, makes for a great beer, but it doesn't last as long. So hops changed the whole industry, which then became part of the German purity law, and the German purity law really was a power grab. It's very misogynistic.
Yeah.
Because once the German purity law comes into play, suddenly the brewing industry gets taken out of the hands of women. It gets completely put into the hands of males, and you have this now merchant class of people peddling beer and ales that is, and it's because it became more financially lucrative and profitable.
Yeah.
And so suddenly men are like, nope, not for you, it's for me, which I think is wrong.
As there's more and more breweries on the scene, everyone's trying to distinguish themselves, and some people, in fact, are going backwards and looking to the analogs that came before hops, like the gruit, which is the mix of all these different herbs and spices and flowers and whatnot. And what they did is the same thing as hops, is they balanced the malt. Because if you have a beer that's nothing but malt, it's going to be super sweet and cloying. You need a balance. You know me, I'm all about balance.
It's also to preserve the length of time before it sours.
That's true. That's true. But hey, one thing, if we're going to talk historical, if we're going to talk about German purity law, Ja, es tun Reizkobat. Now, that was 1516. What was that? Do you know what that was? What's the rule of that Reizkobat?
That there are 3 ingredients.
4?
4 ingredients.
Okay.
There are 4 ingredients.
Yeah.
Pardon me. There are 4 ingredients that must be in beer.
And that's it. And it's, what are those 4 ingredients? We've got water, and we've got barley. Now this actually, so we're going to stick with that. So we've got water, barley, we've got yeast, we've got hops. Those are 4. Now, they did change it, because later on, because I love a good Hefeweizen, right?
Yeah.
I'm a big fan. But that's got wheat in it. It's actually a mix of wheat and barley. So originally, in 1516, when they came out with that rule, it was only barley, which we can appreciate because we're the Barleymen.
Absolutely. Hence the name.
But I love wheat as well. I love it. And
I don't think there's anything wrong with a good wheat beer.
no, I don't think it's ever entirely wheat, but it's a blend of wheat. But yeah, later on they added wheat to it. But I believe as of now that's it. It's really 5 ingredients. It's like barley, wheat, water, yeast, hops. That's it.
So Jim Koch, innovator, right? We were there.
Yeah.
He came up with this recipe from his great-great-grandfather, excuse me.
Yeah.
What else do you want to say about that?
Well, I would say you got a classic German recipe. Actually, it's got a little bit of Austrian influence. This is actually what's called, Sam Adams is a Vienna lager, which is an amber lager. It's very rich, a lot of malts, but it's got a nice balance to the hops. But this is a Vienna lager. But I will say it's interesting to point out that he used Sam Adams, a patriot from Boston, Massachusetts, as a symbol, fittingly in a couple ways, based point one, they're based in Boston, Massachusetts, but also for that area, is just a great icon, a great brand.
All right. So we have the old, we have the new. Is there anything you would like to say as a graphic designer about what it is that we are looking at in the packaging?
Okay, if you saw our last episode and you saw Fat Tire versus the new Fat Tire, huge difference. This is a different story. They've kept the same packaging. All they've done is they've added a red area on the top. They've added the word remastered, now brighter and easier drinking, which is interesting considering where we went with the last episode, what that means.
Well, I to sum that up, not to ruin the last episode for you, but there's some generational differences that are at play here. When we get into the differences, so we went through the ingredients of the beers on the last episode. Let's talk about what's different between these 2 Sam Adams today.
Do you want to know what's different, Mike?
I do. I want to know what's different.
One thing. Now, whereas Fat Tire, a lot of differences were made. Jim Koch changed one thing. Now, he says the recipe is exactly the same. That's not true. It's almost true. It is the same, except for it includes one additional ingredient. The new Boston Lager features lactobacillus, which is a bacteria which creates lactic acid. This actually reduces the amount of filtration needed, and it does change the flavor, from what I've heard.
Yeah, which we're about to find out. But I will tell you, that makes perfect sense, right? Because one of the things that you must do as a brewer is be able to control your pH levels.
Yes.
So you don't want them to go wildly one way or the other. And this is the difference between having somebody check on your rental property once a month versus having somebody live in-house where they can constantly make the adjustments.
Where do you think Jim Koch got this idea?
I mean, I'm going to go with German brewing.
German brewing. The process of biological acidification comes from Germany. So basically, what Sam Adams is doing is they're using a German technique that's been used for over 150 years.
So would you say that this one change in Sam Adams is actually bringing it more in line with historical German brewing?
I would argue yes, Mike. Yes, and you know what Jim Koch in several interviews, he's always saying this, that they haven't found the perfect Boston lager yet, but they're just constantly, it's an evolution, and they're trying to get closer and closer, and that with this new biological acidification, this German technique, they're closer.
I mean, I love that. You know me. I love the throwback to the historical past. I will say, interestingly enough, though, that particular technique is not very widespread in American beers.
Oh no,
no. Instead, we have to compensate otherwise.
Yeah, there's two ways you can do it. One is you add lactic acid. You don't have bacteria make it. You just add it, or you use what's called acidulated malt, which is. Oh, sorry.
So yeah, let's talk about the tasting, right? If you'll pass me some bottles, we
All right.
will
We got two. We got two of the old left. There's the original, I should say. And we'll go
the
with
old, the original, the OG,
the unremastered.
Yes. All right. So.
Okay, this is the original.
Yes. And then this one's also an original, right?
No.
Absolutely. Okay, so
It was really neat in the beginning of this, Mike. I can still see it a little bit, but it was a really neat vortex of carbonation coming up. The plume, it wasn't straight. It was spiral.
Oh yeah, look at that.
You see it?
Yep.
That's really neat.
It does. It has that nice little curve to it.
Almost like a double helix of a DNA.
Almost like the double helix of a DNA. If you had two of them back to back and you had the right camera,
yeah,
you too could make DNA out of your beer.
Well, as I said in the first episode, it is part of our DNA, you know.
Oh no, beer is for sure part of our DNA, and it's part of our humanity. Honestly,
I would argue so. Let's talk about the look of these two beers.
Let's talk about the look of these two beers.
To my eyes, identical. Color-wise, carbonation, foam, the color of the foam, the look of the foam.
Honestly, even the way the bubbles come
Yes,
up.
yes. I mean, these two,
they look exactly the same.
they look exactly the same. These are identical.
You would not be able to, by sight, tell the difference between the two.
No.
Right.
All right. Well, let's nose the original.
Okay.
Classic.
It is. So, what are you getting there?
I'm getting, strong malt, but it's tempered by the hops, which are not. You can tell they're definitely not Pacific Northwest. You're not getting the pine, the citrus, but they're there. You're getting a bitterness. You're getting, slight floral notes, but definitely there's a bitterness there to balance out the malt, which suggests the taste is going to be the same.
So I agree with the maltness, with the maltiness of it.
Yeah, I would say it's a refreshing aroma. To me, with my background, New England, this is a classic aroma for me. This harkens back days of my late teens for sure. Just smelling this it's nostalgic for me.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, let's nose the new one.
All right.
You know, it's not actually. It's very subtle. If there is a difference, it is subtle.
Yes, this is really close.
I mean, like, it is so subtle that I could almost, the slight margin of time in between the pores could account for the variance that I smell, and it's not. Yeah, that's a smart idea.
I'm getting a little bit of a softer nose. I'm getting a little less of the tang from the malts, maybe a little less from the hops. It's subtle, but it's a little softer. That's all I'm getting. A little bit softer, a little bit more subdued, but all the same characteristics.
Yeah, I can't argue with what you just said. Let's go for the taste.
All right, we'll go with the original.
So this is the original.
Cheers. Very nice. A lot of carbonation, full mouth experience for me.
So it's interesting. I know I talked a lot about this last episode, but this beer, to me in particular, it's not a complete mouthfeel. In other words, I'm not feeling it resonate across my entire tongue. I'm feeling middle to front resonance, and then I'm feeling it right at the back as it hits the back of my tongue and throat, but there's a noticeable gap in between.
Not sure if I'm getting that, but it's definitely, for me, it's a rich and balanced flavor, and it's kind of hitting everywhere for me.
Yeah, it has a sweetness to it.
Mm-hmm.
The maltiness, and I mean, again, this is just a classic beer that I think I've had. It's hard to critically define in the same way as something I've never tried before.
Right.
All right. So I am a fan of the Boston Lager. Let's see if I'm a fan of the new one.
All right, let's go for it.
It is a little different flavor-wise, but it's subtle. It's hard to define. Let me do them right next to each other.
This is much closer than the two Fat Tires. Much closer. I mean, if you handed this to me and didn't say anything, you're like, here's the Sam Adams, I'd be like, yeah, this is Sam Adams.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. It's harder for me to differentiate. Harder for me to differentiate for sure. Honestly, the thing I can tell you that is different for me is where I feel it sizzle on my tongue. This one sizzles in the front, this one sizzles a little bit further back. And that could be completely psychosomatic. I don't know that that's an actual thing, what I've just said. So yeah, there's some tasting. I mean, they're both very malty, they're sweet. I agree with you. If you didn't tell me it was a new one and you said, hey, have a Sam Adams and we're talking about it, not sure I'd even notice a difference.
Okay, I'm getting maybe this is a little more acidic. It's a little brighter, as they're saying. And usually when you hear the word brighter, especially when it's coffee, it means more acidic. I am picking up that this new one maybe is a little bit more acidic. Is it easier drinking?
I almost feel like it's the same type.
I do. This is really, really close. And like now I'm almost wondering, I'm like, okay, yeah, we know they're using this biological acidification, but it's like, really, did this even merit putting that on the package? Or did they do that just to, keep up with the Joneses, the Fat Tires of the world? Like, hey, we're changing too, we're updating, because this is nowhere near as dramatic as the two Fat Tires. This is so close to me.
Let's talk about the finish a little bit,
Okay.
right? Because you get that maltiness.
Mm-hmm.
It has that full mouthfeel, like you said earlier.
Yeah.
Maltiness all the way through. I mean, yeah. I guess it's not something new to add. It's a good beer. I mean, if we're just going to be honest, it's a good beer. Let's talk about its coolness factor, though.
Oh, I mean, it's definitely a very cool beer. It's a legendary beer. It's one of those one of those, iconic craft beers. I mean, you think about it. Let's talk about it. You've got, well, the first one in the late '70s is Anchor Steam. This is number 2. This comes before Sierra Nevada Pale Ale. This comes before Fat Tire. This comes before Stone and a lot of the others in the '90s. This was in the market, when we were in elementary school.
Whereas I'm gonna also say though that this is, like I mentioned last episode, this is a victim of its own success. It depends on where you're drinking and who you're drinking with, but even though Sam Adams was one of the very forerunners of craft beer, it's not considered as cool to be drinking a Sam Adams as, for example, something new and exciting.
Oh yeah, that's very much true. It's just been around so long, just like Fat Tire, it's so established that it's almost like it's not craft beer.
Correct.
Yeah.
It's the establishment of its own success that makes it lose some of it. It's not hard to find. It's not
readily available.
It's lost some of that cultishness where it's elusive in some way.
Yeah,
it's not.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean, again, like we said last episode, this doesn't mean that this is a bad beer or that it's not worth your time. This is one of the forerunners of craft beer in America.
Yeah, and I would say this totally stands the test of time. Mm-hmm. I mean, I've had a lot of different beers of this genre, this style, but this still holds up now. This is still a solid beer. Both the old and the remastered, which honestly I'm having a hard time to differentiate. They're both almost one and the same, but it's a solid beer.
Final thought on the coolness factor that I just have to throw out there. Ooh, that time it tastes a little different. I'm going to try that again in a second. The final thing I want to say about the coolness factor, though, is that you can be in any bar, even where you are around elite beer snobs. You can order a Sam Adams and nobody's going to poo-poo you. They're going to be like,
ideally,
okay. They're going to be like, oh yeah, Sam Adams, yeah, it's good. Even as they're super excited about this rare find that happens to be on tap wherever they are. In fact, Sam Adams, when I go to bars without a huge variety, Sam Adams is a go-to for me.
Yeah.
So,
tasting this again for like the 10th time now, I would say that the new version is a little lighter and a little zestier than the old version, which is great. I think it is. Really, it's hard to differentiate, but I like the new.
I mean, I feel like. Right, I was talking about the difference on my tongue, and then we're talking about the acidity, and I wonder if I'm feeling this one on the front of my tongue due to where the taste buds are. So you have those concentrations, sweet is at the very tip of the tongue, of course, and you have sour right behind it, right, and then salty, and then bitter is in the back, usually, the phthalates. We won't get into biology and the nervousness, but the nervous system.
Right.
So I wonder if that's why I feel this sizzle more in the front.
Maybe
it's because it's setting off my sour a little more than the first.
From the lactic acid. Yeah, that could be. It could be. Honestly, if I had to pick, they're so close. I have to pick the new because the old one's unavailable. No, I think... let me do it one more time.
You're picking out of convenience.
I would say necessity.
Yeah, if I'm picking a winner, I say tie. It's a dead heat. It is not significant enough of a change that I feel like it would make any difference at all to my drinking behavior.
No. Yeah, it's so close.
If you poured me a draft of this in my local in a local bar, I would drink it and I wouldn't even know that it was the remastered versus the original. It's definitely just not as different as the new Fat Tire versus the old Fat Tire. Well, so then, I mean, really, this is a power of advertising type thing.
I think so.
I
really do.
If we're talking about generationally, Generation Y, Generation Z, millennials, right? If they're into healthy, lighter, thinking about their bodies, thinking about consequences more than, let's say, Generation X or Baby Boomer, then yeah, it makes genius marketing to say, hey, look at us, we're brand new too. And honestly, I don't think they're wrong. I'm going to take this opinion. I don't think they're wrong. Whether you remaster it by changing one step and it tastes identical, if it brings new drinkers, new adventurers to what is a classic and rightfully deserved legendary state, is that wrong? Is it wrong to change your signage and to make it brand new?
No. I mean, that's capitalism. You got to stay competitive, and you got to keep up with the Joneses, so to speak. And I understand why they're doing it. I mean, they're announcing to the younger generation, the 21 and 29-year-olds, like, this is brighter, easier drinking.
Yeah.
Oh, I'll try it. Sounds good.
What's interesting is that if you somehow pulled the label off, put it on an old one, and gave it to a 21 to 29-year-old, would they even feel like the original was not lighter and easier drinking?
I don't know.
I don't think they would. I think hats off to Sam Adams for trying to capture a new market. I think that it's negligible. The difference in these two is negligible.
Yeah, and I would speak to any like diehard loyal Sam Adams fans that were perhaps scared by this, like, oh no, it's going to change. It's the same. Like, this is I mean, maybe not exactly the same. Yeah, maybe it's a little lighter, a little zestier, but it's so close. So, unlike Fat Tire that we just talked about, which is somewhat of a different animal, even though it's got some of the same flavor profiles, this is neck and neck. Really, really close. So, no, it's good. There's no difference for me.
Yeah. That about wraps up episode 3 of the Barleymen. I'm Michael.
And I'm Jason. And as we always say at the Barleymen,
never stop exploring.
Cheers.
Good timing.
Sorry.
Cut this.
Oh. I'll be right back.
No, it's fine. I mean, that's
smoke them if you got them. I feel like this one is good. I like it.
You like it so far?
So far.
You like our kick back to history?
Yeah. And I feel we're bouncing back and forth there.